Rylan Voss ducked under the low-hanging pipe in the cramped, dimly lit command center. It was the kind of place that made you question your life choices more than usual, assuming you were lucky enough to have had any choices to begin with. He kicked aside an empty ration pack and squatted next to the console where Jax, the tech with more piercings than personality, was tapping furiously. The screen flickered with numbers and symbols that might as well have been ancient runes. "What have we got, Jax?" Ryland's voice was a mixture of exhaustion and sarcasm, like he'd just been asked to admire a particularly ugly baby. Jax pushed her green hair behind her ear, her fingers leaving grease on the neon strands. "Looks like the Yatharn aren't the only ones with a sense of humor," she muttered. "We've got something weird going on with the Time Messer. Weird like our only hope is a toga-clad AI, or weird like let's try turning it off and on again?" Rylan asked, scratching at the stubble that was an acceptable compromise between rebellion and hygiene. "Weird like this pile of circuits might have just discovered slapstick is a weapon," Jax replied, her eyes narrowing like she'd just caught someone trying to explain how pineapple on pizza was a good idea. Rylan raised an eyebrow. "Slapstick as a weapon? Is this some kind of joke?" "I'm serious." "Well, as serious as you can be when you've been living on recycled air and freeze-dried despair for 3 years," Jax said, twisting a few knobs without any real hope they'd do something. The Yatharn had conquered Earth faster than a bad decision, and now humanity was holed up on Europa, hiding like the galaxy's least impressive Easter egg. The command center was buried beneath layers of ice and rock, so at least they'd go out cold if the aliens found them. Rylan glanced over his shoulder, making sure none of the crew were listening. "All right, give me the lowdown on this comedic anomaly." Jax gestured to the console, which was displaying what looked like a chaotic mix of stand-up routines and theoretical physics. "We're running tests on the Time Messer and it spat this out. The readings spiked when we introduced certain, let's call them punchlines. So you're telling me we've weaponized humor?" Rylan asked, incredulous. "Next you'll say fart jokes can win a war. Hey, if it works, it works. The Yatharn don't get human humor, remember. Their sense of irony is about as developed as a potato," Jax said with a smirk. Rylan leaned back against the wall, contemplating the absurdity. "So we make aliens laugh themselves to death. That's the theory," Jax replied, a bit too cheerfully for someone discussing interstellar comedy warfare. Rylan sighed. "Great. What's next? We send them a mixtape of 80s sitcoms and hope they implode." "Well, we need to test it first," Jax pointed out. "Before we go bombing the Yatharn with knock-knock jokes, we should see if this thing really works." Rylan rubbed his temples, trying to massage the disbelief away. "Fine, let's get a team together, but if this goes south, I'm blaming you." "Fair enough," Jax said, already turning back to the console. "But if it works, I'm taking all the credit." Rylan pushed himself up, his knees popping like a bag of microwave popcorn. "Get the gang together in the main hold, and bring the humor files. If we're about to test the galaxy's worst joke, I want to at least enjoy the punchline." As the crew gathered, Rylan stood at the forefront like a school teacher ready to explain why the experiment with Mentos and soda might not have been the best idea. The rebels, a ragtag bunch of misfits more suited to losing bar fights than saving humanity, clustered around him. "All right, folks," Rylan began, clapping his hands together. "We've got a new plan on how to deal with our lovely neighbors, the Yatharn. Oh, what is it this time?" Micah, the engineer who'd once tried to hotwire a vending machine, asked skeptically. "Ship him anthrax-laced greeting cards." "Not quite," Rylan said, trying to keep a straight face. "We're going to make them laugh." The room fell silent. Someone in the back coughed awkwardly. "Laugh," repeated Dela, their medic with the bedside manner of a drill sergeant. "You know they don't get our humor, right? We could barely get them to understand hello without them thinking it was a slur." "That's the point," Jax chimed in, her voice rising above the mutters. "The Yatharn can't process humor. It's like a logical paradox to them." Micah smirked. "So, We're going full Monty Python on their alien asses. Rylan chuckled despite himself. Something like that. Jax and I have been working on the time messer. Turns out it reacts to humor in a way that might just give us an edge. And if it doesn't, Dela asked, arms crossed. What, we just run out and tickle them to death? Plan B, Rylan said. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. We load up some jokes, send them through the time messer and see what happens, Jax explained, shrugging off the skepticism like a coat that didn't fit. Worst case, we have a laugh before we get vaporized. Rylan gave the crew a lopsided grin. Come on, who wouldn't want their last stand to be a comedy roast? The laughter that followed was nervous, but it had an edge of real amusement. Because at the end of the galaxy, you might as well go out with a punchline. A couple of hours later, they stood ready, the time messer primed and humming with a noise that could be described as enthusiastic if you were generous. Rylan watched as Jax loaded the humor files, a mix of jokes, sketches, and one particularly questionable dissertation on the comedic timing of banana peels. All right, Rylan said, taking a deep breath. Let's see if laughter really is the best medicine against aliens. With the flick of a switch and a prayer to whatever gods were listening, Jax engaged the system. The console lit up like a rave, and a low hum filled the room, vibrating through their boots. The first joke was sent, something about a priest, a rabbi, and an intergalactic bar, though Rylan was fuzzy on the details. The lights on the console blinked, and the air seemed to buzz with anticipation. Anything? Rylan asked, trying not to sound too hopeful. Jax squinted at the readings, her fingers dancing over the keys. Hold on, it's... Holy shit, Rylan, we might have actually done it. Rylan's heart skipped a beat. Done what? Look at these readings. The Yatharn fleet is. They're faltering. Their systems are going haywire. You're kidding, Micah said, leaning over Jax's shoulder. You mean they're actually laughing themselves into oblivion? Jax grinned, a rare sight that was both unsettling and triumphant. Something like that. Their systems can't handle the input. Well, I'll be damned, Dela said, shaking her head in disbelief. We might just pull this off, you mad bastards. Rylan allowed himself a moment of triumph, a brief, shining second where the universe seemed to tilt in their favor, but in the back of his mind one thought loomed. All right, he said, turning to the crew. Let's not get cocky. We keep this up and maybe, just maybe, we can turn the tide. And if it fails, Micah asked, ever the realist. Rylan shrugged. Then at least we'll go out laughing. As the crew prepared for the next phase, Rylan couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of something monumental or monumentally disastrous. But hell, if the universe wanted to kill him for telling jokes, at least it would be one hell of a way to go. The system hummed with a newfound purpose, and Rylan Voss, against all odds, allowed himself a smile. Because in the dark expanse of space, humor just might be their last best weapon. And if not, well, at least they'd die with a grin. Rylan Voss found himself crammed into a corner of the command center, wedged between a bizarrely humming console and Nix Arlo, the tech-savvy strategist who was as sharp as she was perpetually annoyed. Her black hair was tied back in a messy bun, a pair of goggles resting on her forehead like a crown for the overly caffeinated. All right, Nix, Rylan said, trying to ignore how her elbow seemed magnetically attracted to his ribs every time she shifted. We've got a new weapon. Slapstick. How do we make it work against a species that thinks irony is a type of metal? Nix turned, her expression a masterpiece of skepticism. I'm still wrapping my head around the fact that we're considering this our best option. It's like deciding your last meal should be a diet shake. Cade Joran, the historian with a penchant for deadpan delivery, leaned against the nearest wall, arms crossed. Humor's a part of human culture, right? Maybe we dig through history, find something that'll make those Yatharn short-circuit. Right, Rylan agreed, scratching at the stubble that seemed to thrive in the low lighting. Tell me, Cade, what did you study? The complete works of slapstick comedians or just the history of how not to die? Both, actually. Cade replied, his voice as dry as Europa's ice sheets. I've got access to the archives of Earth's greatest hits. Charlie Chaplin, Monty Python, Adam Sandler, though I suspect the last one's only useful if we need to bore them to death. Okay, Ryland said, ignoring Jax, who was still juggling the Time Messer's settings like a circus performer with a death wish. Let's start with the classics. What have we got? Banana peels, whoopee cushions. That thing with the rakes, Nix smirked as she tapped on her datapad, pulling up a list of humanity's finest comedic moments. I'd say start with the banana peel. It's universal, right? You slip, you fall, someone laughs until it hurts. Rylan nodded. Classic. But how do we make the Yatharn slip on a metaphorical banana peel? Their ships don't exactly run on slapstick comedy fuel. Jax, still engrossed in her work with the Time Messer, chimed in. We need to find the right frequency, the perfect comedic timing. I mean, if laughter's contagious, maybe the Time Messer can amplify it. Rylan chuckled. So we're turning the Time Messer into a laugh track on steroids. Something like that, Jax replied, not looking up from her console. But we need to calibrate it. Make sure we're hitting that sweet spot between existential dread and the funny bone. Great, Rylan answered, glancing over at Cade. What else have we got in the archives? Something that says you're screwed in an amusing way. Cade flipped through his notes, which were stored on a device that looked suspiciously like it had survived a small explosion. Well, there's the ancient art of the pie in the face. Simple, direct, and never fails to entertain, unless you're the one eating the pie, of course. Nix snorted. And here I thought we were going to have an intellectual discussion. This is intellectual, Cade said without missing a beat. Humor is hardwired into us. It's like our last refuge when everything else has gone to hell, which, need I remind you, is where we currently are. Ryland sighed, trying to find a comfortable position that didn't involve impaling himself on a loose bolt. All right, load the banana peel routine and the pie slapstick into the Time Messer. If the Yatharn understand anything, it's probably going to be the universal appeal of watching someone else make an ass of themselves. Jax nodded, her fingers dancing over the keys. It's worth a shot. Worst case, we get a good laugh before everything blows up. As they worked, Rylan leaned back, letting his gaze wander over the cramped command center. The place was a mess of wires, screens, and the occasional unidentifiable stain, all coated in a fine layer of despair. A fitting backdrop for humanity's last stand. Look, Ryland said, turning back to the team, we've got to assume the Yatharn are a step ahead. I mean, they took our home faster than a kid with a stolen cookie jar. We need to check every angle. Cade shrugged, his expression unreadable. The Yatharn might have tech we can't even imagine, but they are not infallible. They didn't expect us to lash out with humor. It's like trying to duel with rubber chickens. Nix raised an eyebrow. Well, if we can't get them with humor, maybe we should just throw the damn chickens at them. Rylan laughed, the sound more a dry cough than genuine amusement. Hey, whatever works. If the universe wants to end with us being the punchline, let's at least make it a good one. Hours passed as they calibrated the Time Messer, testing frequencies and tinkering with punchlines until the device practically spat puns and pratfalls. The air buzzed with the low hum of technology on the brink of brilliance or disaster. Finally, Jax stepped back, wiping grease from her hands onto a rag that had seen better days. All right, it's ready. We've got the setup. Now we wait for the Yatharn to walk into it. Rylan glanced at the team, their faces a mosaic of exhaustion, hope, and a pinch of madness. Brace yourselves. If this works, we might just pull off the biggest joke in the galaxy. As they activated the Time Messer, the room filled with a low, vibrating thrum, the kind that made your teeth itch and your skin feel like it was trying to crawl off your bones. The console's lights danced, reflecting off every surface like a disco ball of impending doom. Okay, Ryland said, trying to keep the nervous energy in check. Time to test the waters. Let's see how the Yatharn handle a little human comedy. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was silent save for the flickering hum of the Time Messer. Then slowly, readings began to scroll across the screen, data streaming faster than Jax could keep up. They're reacting, she said, eyes wide with disbelief. Their systems are destabilizing. It's working. A cheer erupted from the crew, a ragged sound that was more relief than joy. But Rylan remained focused, his eyes fixed on the screens. "All right," he said, raising his voice above the noise. "Let's not start planning the victory parade just yet. Keep monitoring. If they catch on, we're back to square one." Nix nodded, already analyzing the data with the intensity of a hawk eyeing its next meal. "If we can keep this up, we might actually have a chance." Cade, who'd been watching from his corner, allowed a small smile to break through his usual stoic mask. "A chance. That's all we ever needed, right? Just one damn chance." Rylan nodded, feeling the weight of leadership settle heavily on his shoulders. "Yeah, but remember, we're not doing this for glory or revenge. We're doing it because it's the only card we've got left to play." Jax glanced over, her usual sarcasm softening for a moment. "Hey, if we're gonna go out, at least it'll be with a bang and maybe a laugh." "Let's keep our fingers crossed it's more of the latter," Rylan replied, a wry smile tugging at his lips. The Ior stretched on, tension coiling tighter as the team watched the Yatharn fleet on their screens, the aliens' confusion apparent even through the limited visual data. "What's happening now?" Rylan asked, peering over Jax's shoulder. "Looks like they're trying to recalibrate," she replied. "Their systems are trying to adapt, but it's like watching someone try to solve a Rubik's Cube with oven mitts." Rylan chuckled. "Can't say I blame them. I barely understand what we're doing, and it was our idea." As the crew continued to monitor the situation, Rylan felt a strange sense of camaraderie settle over them, an unspoken bond forged in the crucible of their absurd plan. It was the kind of camaraderie you only found when you were one unfortunate incident away from being space debris. "All right," Rylan said, watching the data unfold. "Let's keep the jokes coming. If we're going to win this, we're going to need every banana peel and rubber chicken we can throw." With renewed determination, the team got to work, the air filling with the sounds of laughter and the occasional groan at a particularly bad pun. But beneath the humor was a steely resolve, a determination to fight back against impossible odds with the only weapon they had left: humor. Because if there was one thing humanity was good at, it was laughing in the face of disaster, even if that disaster came with tentacles and a penchant for world domination. Rylan was slammed back to reality like a malfunctioning airlock door. The Yatharn had intercepted their little experiment, and their response came quicker than a drunk's fist in a bar brawl. The command center's lights flickered as if even the power grid knew they were screwed. "Well, that didn't take long," Rylan muttered, rubbing his temples. "How the hell did they catch on so fast?" Cade, leaning against the wall as usual, shrugged. "Maybe they're big fans of slapstick. Or they just don't appreciate our sense of humor." Nix had her goggles pulled over her eyes, furiously tapping at her datapad like it owed her money. "We need to redirect our focus. We can't entertain them with a single act. We need variety like a cosmic comedy club." "Great," Rylan grumbled. "Maybe we can charge them a cover fee while we're at it." Jax, her hair an unsettling shade of neon green today, looked up from the time messer, which was emitting noises that sounded suspiciously like a cat coughing up a hairball. "We have to use this, not just to destabilize them, but to distract. Hit them where they least expect it, like a misfired fart at a funeral." "Classy," Rylan said, nodding. "But you're onto something. We need to broaden our act. What's next on the list, Nix?" She glanced up, her eyes gleaming with the fervor of a mad scientist. "We could try the invisible wall gag. They run into nothing and look stupid doing it. The Yatharn won't know what hit him, or what didn't." Cade's deadpan delivery cut through the tension. "As long as we don't run into one ourselves." "So, we're turning our cloak tech into a practical joke now?" Rylan asked, raising an eyebrow. "Why not?" Nix said. "Desperation breeds innovation or insanity. Either way, it's our best shot." Jax cracked her knuckles, already tinkering with the time messer's settings. "I'll see if I can rig the cloak to flicker at just the right moment." "It's like giving them a ghost to chase." Rylan leaned back, trying to get comfortable in a seat that felt like sitting on a bed of nails, or one particularly pointed nail. All right, let's get it set up. If we can use humor to distract them, we can hit their smaller outposts and weaken their supply lines. And if it doesn't work, Cade asked, his calm voice like ice water to the face. Then we've got a front row seat to the worst comedy routine in history, Ryland said with a mirthless chuckle. As the team sprang into action, the atmosphere in the command center was one of frantic determination. Screens flickered with streams of data, and the air buzzed with the excitement of a plan that was just crazy enough to work, or get them all killed. Nyx adjusted her goggles, the lenses reflecting the chaotic dance of lights on her console. I've got a list of targets, small skirmishes, nothing major, just enough to test the waters, Rylan nodded. Good. We'll start with the outpost at Tarsus Ridge. It's isolated enough that if we screw up, the rest of the galaxy won't notice. Except for the Yatharn, Cade pointed out. Yeah, well, Rylan replied, they're already pissed, so what's a little more hate? Jack snorted as she worked. Think of it as us giving them a crash course in human culture. Maybe they'll learn to appreciate our finer qualities, like not taking ourselves too seriously. Or they'll just obliterate us, Cade added helpfully. Rylan grinned. Optimism, Cade. It suits you. The preparations were as frenetic as a spaceport bar fight. Data pads beeped with incoming messages, wires were hastily soldered, and Rylan wondered if he should have taken up juggling, given how many things he was trying to keep airborne at once. Got it, Jax declared, punching a final command into the console. The cloaking is synced with the time messer. We're ready to roll when you are. Let's do it, Rylan said, standing up to pace the room. Hit him with everything we've got. We're aiming for a tactical diversion, not a comedy special. With a nod, Nyx activated the time messer, the device humming with an almost malevolent glee. The room's lights dimmed, casting everything in a wash of blue that made everyone look like they'd seen one too many ghosts. Here goes nothing, Rylan said, bracing himself as if the ship might careen off course any second. The first few moments were tense, a silence hanging over the team that was almost reverent in its intensity. Then, slowly, something magical happened. The outpost at Tarsus Ridge popped up on their screens, the Yatharn soldiers meandering around like ants on a hot plate. The time messer engaged, and the cloaking flickered like an old projector, setting the stage for their latest act. One by one, Yatharn soldiers began to trip, stumble, and fall over invisible obstacles, their movements sparking a twisted ballet of confusion and chaos. Looks like they're having a bad day, Jax remarked, not without satisfaction. More like an existential crisis, Cade added. Rylan watched, a grin creeping across his face. I'll give them this. The Yatharn sure know how to take a pratfall. For a moment, it seemed the universe held its breath, watching the Yatharn bumble around with all the grace of a blindfolded elephant. Then slowly, their confusion turned to anger, their communications a garbled mess of disbelief and frustration. They're trying to re-establish order, Nyx reported, her fingers flying over her datapad. We've got a window. We hit them now, we can make some real damage. Let's give him hell, Rylan said, his voice hardening. With precision and purpose, the rebels launched their attack. Blasters erupted in a symphony of destruction. Targeted explosives tore through the outpost's defenses, and confusion reigned supreme as the Yatharn floundered amidst the chaos. The air was electric with tension, each member of the team focused with laser intensity as they played their part in the unfolding drama. It was a dance of destruction and distraction, every move calculated to throw their enemy off balance. Direct hit, Cade called, his eyes glued to the data streaming across the screen. And here I thought you were all about ancient history, Rylan quipped. Turns out I'm a quick study, Cade replied with a hint of a smile. As the Yatharn scrambled to regroup, the rebels pressed their advantage, striking with the kind of reckless abandon that came from knowing you had nothing left to lose. It was a gamble, a desperate roll of the dice, but sometimes desperation was all you had. Report, Rylan barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Outpost is down, Nix confirmed, a note of triumph in her voice. They're in disarray. We need to pull back before they regroup. Agreed, Rylan said. Let's not push our luck. With a final flourish, the rebels withdrew, leaving behind a scene of chaos and confusion that would take the Yatharn Iors to unravel. It wasn't a victory, not by a long shot, but it was a start. Back in the command center, the team shared a moment of silent camaraderie, the weight of their achievement settling over them like a shroud. They weren't heroes, not by any stretch, but they were still here, still fighting, still laughing in the face of oblivion. "So, what now?" Jax asked, her eyes bright with adrenaline. "Now," Rylan replied, "we keep pushing, we keep laughing, and we keep hitting them where it hurts." Cade nodded. "Humor might not win us the war, but it's definitely making it more interesting. And if we go down," Nix added, "at least we'll do it with a smile." Rylan grinned, feeling the weight lift from his shoulders, if only for a moment. "Exactly. Now let's get back to work. We've got a galaxy to annoy." As the team dispersed, the command center hummed with renewed energy. They were still outnumbered, still outgunned, and still teetering on the brink of extinction. But they were ready for whatever came next. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was finding humor in the darkest of places, and using it to light the way forward. The command center buzzed with a chaotic energy that would put a caffeinated squirrel to shame. Rylan Voss, pacing like a caged animal, was trying to think 2 steps ahead of a species that had already proven itself disturbingly quick on the uptake. The Yatharn had adapted far too quickly to their slapstick antics at Tarsus Ridge. Clearly, humor was a language they'd need to scream instead of whisper. Rylan stopped mid-pace, squinting at nothing in particular like an old man considering a particularly stubborn crossword. "All right, team, we need to escalate this. I'm talking a full-blown comedic assault." Cade, as usual, lounged against a nearby wall, his expression dry enough to soak up a flood. A live comedic performance as a distraction for a major operation. "Well, if we're going down, may as well go down famous, or infamous," Nix added, adjusting her goggles. "Depends on your perspective." Jax, who had been fiddling with the time messer like it was a particularly finicky piece of avant-garde furniture, looked up. Her neon green hair glowed in the dim light, making her look like a defiant alien in her own right. "What's the plan, Rylan?" "Prank calls and whoopee cushions," Rylan grinned, a flash of teeth that would have looked predatory if he weren't so damn tired. "Something like that. We'll broadcast a distraction using some of humanity's greatest hits. Laurel and Hardy, Charlie Chaplin, maybe even a bit of Monty Python for good measure." Cade raised an eyebrow. "You think the Yatharn will sit down with popcorn for that?" "They might." Nix was busy on her datapad, spinning up scenarios. "Or they'll just be confused enough to give us the time to hit them where it hurts. Right in the supply lines," Rylan added. "We'll need to synchronize it with a major offensive. If they are laughing or just bewildered, we can disrupt their operations and maybe even snag some supplies." Jack snorted, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a cough. "So we're weaponizing stand-up comedy. Bold, desperate times, desperate measures," Cade deadpanned. "Exactly," Rylan said. "Besides, it's not like we have a lot of options here." "I'd rather die laughing than crying." Nix tapped at her pad, her eyes gleaming beneath her goggles. "I'll handle the tech side. We can patch into their communication network using the time messer's signal disruptions. It'll be like hijacking a radio station in the old days. Next you're going to tell me we're bringing back disco," Jax said with a mock groan. "Only if we want to truly demoralize them," Cade shot back. "Let's save that nuclear option for later," Rylan said with a wry grin. "All right, let's get cracking. We'll need to coordinate the broadcast with our attack. Timing's everything here, people." Jax nodded, her fingers already dancing over the console. "I'll make sure the cloak tech and time messer are in sync. We'll give them a light show they won't forget. And I'll prepare the viewing list," Cade offered, pushing off from the wall with the grace of someone who didn't quite believe in expending unnecessary energy. Hope the Yatharn have subtitles. The command center was a whirlwind of activity. Screens flickered with images of old Earth comedies, hastily converted into formats the Yatharn might comprehend, or at least choke on. Meanwhile, outside the confines of Europa, rebel ships were prepped, ready to take advantage of the chaos. "Okay, folks," Rylan called out, his voice cutting through the din. "This isn't just a joke, it's a strategy. Let's make sure it's one hell of a punchline." Hours later, as the broadcast began, Rylan watched as the screens filled with the antics of long-gone comedians. It was surreal, seeing the past used as a weapon against the future. He wondered if Chaplin had ever imagined his work being used to potentially save humanity. Not that he'd mind, Rylan thought. The man had thrived on chaos. The Yatharn's initial response was confusion, as expected. Their ships hesitated, faltering as they tried to process the unfamiliar visuals and sounds that filled their communications. The rebels' offensive was underway, striking at key points in the Yatharn supply chain with a precision that was almost surgical in its execution. "Looks like they're finding it hard to focus," Cade observed dryly, eyes glued to the screen. "Hard to process humor when you've got no sense of it," Rylan replied. "Let's hope they keep squirming." But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that the Yatharn were regrouping faster than anticipated. Their ships began to realign, coordinating in a way that suggested they were more than just a mindless swarm. This wasn't going to be as easy as they'd hoped. "Damn it," Nix cursed, slamming a fist against the console. "They're adapting faster than we thought." Rylan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Jax, can we do anything to extend the disruption?" Jax shook her head, her expression grim. "The time messer's running hot. One more push and it might blow." "I'm all for reckless abandon, but even I have limits." Cade leaned over, fingers tapping at his datapad. "We could try throwing in some cognitive dissonance. Something that'll make them question reality." "Like what?" Rylan asked. "Cats playing pianos," Jax suggested deadpan. Rylan nodded, a desperate sort of inspiration taking hold. "Do it. Anything's worth a shot." Nix adjusted her goggles, fingers flying over her datapad as she patched in the feed, adding it to the broadcast now. "Let's see how they handle a touch of the absurd." The Yatharn's movements faltered once more, their ships drifting out of formation as the bizarre images flooded their systems. It was a temporary reprieve, but it was enough for the rebels to press their advantage. Explosions lit up the void, each detonation a testament to the rebels' tenacity. The Yatharn outpost at Jair's Belt was obliterated, its supply lines severed in a series of controlled detonations that left the alien forces reeling. "Direct hit on their storage bays," Cade reported. "Looks like we've got their attention now." "Good," Rylan said, his voice taut with tension. "Now let's get the hell out before they regroup." The command center erupted into a flurry of action as the rebels made their retreat. Screens flickered with data, consoles buzzed with incoming messages, and through it all the hum of the time messer persisted, an ever-present reminder of their tenuous hold on the situation. "We're pulling back to the rendezvous point," Jax announced. "ETA is 8 minutes. Let's hope they're still laughing," Nix murmured, eyes fixed on her screen. But as the rebels made their escape, it became clear that the Yatharn were not so easily fooled. Their ships were already regrouping, pursuing the rebels with an intensity that suggested this was no longer just a game to them. "They're onto us," Cade warned, his voice clipped. "Of course they are," Rylan muttered, feeling the weight of inevitability settle over him. "We've poked the hornet's nest one too many times." As the rebel ships raced through space, the Yatharn pursued, their weapons primed and ready. It was a race against time, one that Rylan knew they couldn't afford to lose. "Jax, can we boost the engines?" Rylan asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Already on it," Jax replied, fingers flying over her console. "But we're running on fumes here. We'll need a miracle to make it out in one piece." "Then let's hope for one," Rylan said, gripping the edge of his console as if it might offer some kind of stability in the chaos. The Yatharn ships closed in, their weapons lighting up the void with deadly precision. The rebels weaved and dodged, their ships dancing a dangerous ballet as they sought to outmaneuver their pursuers. Almost there, Nyx called out, her voice tight with concentration. Just a little longer. As the seconds stretched into eternity, Rylan wondered if this was it, if this was how it all ended. But then, with a burst of speed that defied logic, the rebel ships shot forward, narrowly avoiding the Yatharn's fire. "We made it," Jax breathed, her relief palpable. "For now," Cade added, ever the pessimist. Back in the command center, the team shared a moment of collective exhaustion, the adrenaline of their escape bleeding away to leave only the stark reality of their situation. The Yatharn were adapting and fast. If they didn't come up with something new and soon, their next joke might be their last. "So, what's next?" Nyx asked, her voice a mix of weariness and determination. Rylan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We plan. We adapt, and we keep hitting them until one of us gives up," Cade shrugged. "Well, if nothing else, we're consistent in our insanity, and that's what makes us human," Jax said with a grin. Insanity, humor, and a refusal to quit. Rylan looked around at his team, feeling a grim sense of pride. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and still standing. They weren't finished yet, not by a long shot. "All right, let's get to work," Rylan said, his voice firm. "We've got a lot of annoying to do." With that, the command center buzzed back to life, the rebels diving headfirst into the chaos, determined to fight, to laugh, and to live another day. Because if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was finding a way to turn the darkest situations into something they could face with a smile. The command center felt like a dying star, hot, chaotic, and ready to implode. Rylan Voss rubbed his temples, trying to ward off the headache pounding like Yatharn drums in his skull. They'd managed to escape barely, but the aftermath of their little comedy gig was staring them in the face with the kind of disdain only a cosmic disaster could rival. "Next time, remind me to pack a laugh track," Cade said, peering over his datapad with tired eyes. Maybe that'd confuse them enough to just off themselves. Nyx threw a screw at him, which he dodged with the laziness of a cat too tired to care. "We're running out of gags, Cade, and options," she retorted. "The Yatharn are adapting faster than a politician to a scandal." Rylan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling panels as if they held the answers. "So what? They've figured out Chaplin isn't a threat and laugh in the face of our humor. We've still got, well, what do we have left? Not much. The slapstick's just going to piss them off at this point," Jax said, her neon hair casting a sickly glow in the dim light. "They've upgraded their tech. Took 5 minutes tops for them to brush off the cats with pianos and start shooting at us again. Great," Rylan muttered, feeling every inch the weary leader. "We've got a bunch of unfunny jokes and a bunch of even less funny aliens with big guns." Jax smirked, a glint of defiance still in her eyes. "Sounds like my last romantic escapade. Well, I hope it ended better than this," Nyx added, leaning back with an exaggerated sigh. Her goggles glinted menacingly like the eyes of an angry insect. Cade looked up, deadpan as ever. "We're heading for the brightest part of the shit tunnel, aren't we?" "Yeah. And I forgot my sunglasses," Rylan groaned, glancing at the screens that showed their still hovering adversaries. The Yatharn ships were regrouping, their formations tighter, their response times quicker. The bastards had probably developed some new tech that rendered their humor offensive as effective as a rubber knife in a gunfight. "They've got new jamming tech," Nyx said, tapping her datapad. "I'm picking up signals that suggest they are blocking anything we could throw at them. Our comedy isn't landing because, well, they're not actually seeing it anymore." Rylan sighed, the weight of leadership settling heavily on his shoulders. "Fantastic. So, we've got nothing funny, nothing sharp, and nothing quick. We might as well start handing out blindfolds and cigars. Save the cigars for later," Jax said. "Could always use them as makeshift explosives." "Yatharn probably don't know what a nicotine bomb is." "Good idea," Cade said dryly. "We'll just blow smoke up their asses until they keel over," Rylan rubbed his eyes, exhaustion tugging at him. We need a new plan. One that doesn't involve cats, slapstick, or stand-up routines. Nix leaned forward, eyes narrowed in thought. What if we use the time messer in a different way? Not just for broadcasting, but to really mess with their perception. Go on, Rylan prompted, intrigued despite himself. We could scramble their sensors. Make them think they're seeing things they're not, she explained. Instead of running comedy shows, we show them a ghost fleet, ships that aren't there. Make them waste their ammo on shadows. Jax nodded slowly, her fingers tapping a rhythm on the console. I can configure the time messer to do that, but it'll be a one-time thing. After that, it'll be as useful as a paperweight in space. Better than a paperweight on Earth, Cade chimed in, his voice monotone. Rylan glanced around the room, feeling a grim spark of hope. All right. It's risky, but at this point, we don't have a lot to lose. They've got our back to the wall, and we're running out of wall, Jax said, her grin a shade too wild. Let's give it a whirl. With a plan, albeit a desperate one, the team moved into action. The command center was a flurry of activity, each member moving with the kind of energy born only from desperation and the faintest glimmer of hope. Rylan, you really think this'll work? Nix asked, glancing at him as she adjusted her goggles. Honestly, he shrugged. It's either this or we start practicing our Yatharn surrender speeches. Can't wait to see how that goes, Cade muttered. Maybe they'll be so impressed by our idiocy, they'll let us off easy. Jax fiddled with the time messer, her neon hair reflecting off the polished surface. Either way, things'll get interesting. And if we're lucky, the Yatharn'll be too busy trying to figure out what the hell they're shooting at to bother with us. Luck's not exactly been our best friend lately, Rylan said, checking the status on the nearby console. But maybe she's drunk and feeling generous. With everything set, Rylan called for a final review. All right, let's run through this again. If we mess this up, well, let's not mess this up. Jax pointed to the screen where a simulation of their plan played out. We activate the time messer, scramble their sensors, and project a phantom fleet. While they're busy shooting at ghosts, we slip out and regroup. Simple enough, Cade said, arms crossed. Let's just hope the Yatharn aren't packing any proton pack equivalents. Cross the streams, we all go boom, Nix added with a smirk. Classic. Rylan nodded, the tension in the room palpable. All right, get ready. Let's make some chaos. The seconds dragged by, each one a lifetime of anticipation. The command center buzzed with nervous energy as the rebels prepared for what might be their last gamble. Ready? Rylan's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Ready, Jax confirmed, her fingers poised over the console. Do it. Jax hit the switch and the time messer hummed to life, its power thrumming through the room. The screens flickered, and outside, the void danced with phantom ships, projections of light and energy that darted through the Yatharn lines. Look at them go, Nix murmured, watching the Yatharn ship scramble to engage the non-existent threat. It's like watching them try to swat flies in a hurricane. Except the flies are imaginary, Cade added. The Yatharn fired wildly, their shots passing harmlessly through the projections. The rebels took the opportunity, engines flaring as they made their escape, slipping past the chaos unnoticed. Rylan held his breath, waiting for the inevitable backlash. But as the seconds ticked by and no destruction rained down upon them, a sense of cautious relief began to seep in. We're clear, Jax said, her voice a mix of disbelief and triumph. Those idiots are shooting at ghosts. About time something worked, Rylan said, allowing himself a small smile. Now let's not stick around and let them figure it out. The rebels continued their retreat, slipping through the darkness of space with the stealth of shadows, leaving the Yatharn tangled in their own confusion. Back in the command center, the atmosphere was tense but hopeful. They had bought themselves time, but it was a precarious victory. Nix wiped her brow, her goggles pushed up to her forehead. That was one hell of a gamble, boss. Gambled and won, Rylan said, though he knew it was temporary. The Yatharn would adapt as they always did, and next time they'd have to come up with something even more outlandish. Yeah, but now they're probably paranoid as hell, Cade pointed out. They'll be seeing ghosts everywhere. Let's hope it keeps them busy, Jax said, leaning back in her chair with a sigh. We've got a little breathing room now. Rylan looked at his team, a group of misfits and survivors, and felt a surge of pride. They weren't out of the woods, but for now they had a fighting chance. All right, everyone. Let's get back to brainstorming, Rylan said, his voice firm. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. As they settled back into their tasks, the command center pulsed with renewed energy. It was a small victory, but in the grim darkness of their reality, it was enough to fuel their determination. Because if there was one thing they'd learned, it was that humans were nothing if not persistent, even when the universe seemed hell-bent on grinding them down. And somewhere, in the depths of space, the Yatharn were probably wondering just what kind of insanity they had unleashed. Rylan Voss leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously, much like his patience. The command center was as hot as a microwave set to incinerate, and the tension was thick enough to choke a space whale. They'd managed to slip by the Yatharn this time, but it was only a matter of time before their luck took the last shuttle out of town. All right, listen up, Rylan said, clapping his hands together for emphasis. We need something new, something the Yatharn won't see coming until it smacks them in their ugly faces. Cade Joran, ever the historian with a love for sarcastic commentary, glanced up from his datapad. How about a dose of historical irony? It's been a while since we dusted off humanity's old playbook. Jax, her neon hair making her look like the world's most sarcastic traffic cone, raised an eyebrow. You got something specific in mind, or are we just going to reread Shakespeare until they die of boredom? Cade's lips curled into a smirk. Well, there's a concept that might just be what we need. I stumbled across it while sifting through some pre-invasion archives. Something called Commedia dell'arte. Nix Arlo, who had been adjusting her goggles yet again, frowned. You're making this up, aren't you? It sounds like the name of a bad interstellar rock band. Not this time, Cade said, his voice as dry as Europa's surface. It's an ancient Italian form of improvisational theater that relied heavily on stock characters and slapstick. Rylan rubbed his chin thoughtfully, ignoring the itch of stubble that had become as much a part of his identity as his cynicism. Improvisation, huh? So even when things go to hell, we can just roll with it. Might just be crazy enough to work, Cade nodded. The Yatharn might not know what to do with unplanned chaos. They're all about efficiency and order. Throw in a bit of human unpredictability and we might just have a shot. Jax grinned, the kind of grin that promised a world of trouble. Sounds like my kind of theater. We get to wing it and confuse the hell out of them at the same time. What's not to love? Rylan looked around, seeing a flicker of hope glimmering in his crew's eyes. They had been through hell together, and if anyone could make something out of nothing, it was this ragtag bunch of misfits. All right, he said, feeling the weight of leadership shift slightly. Let's get improvising. We need to adapt faster than the Yatharn can figure out what hit them. The command center buzzed to life, a hive of frantic activity punctuated by sarcastic remarks and the occasional clatter of dropped tools. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and they'd make it work or die trying. Cade, meanwhile, was elbow-deep in the archives, pulling up every scrap of information he could find on this ancient art form. You know, he said, not looking up from his datapad, there's something beautifully ironic about using our oldest tricks to outsmart their new tech. Nix snorted, adjusting the settings on some piece of equipment that looked suspiciously like it had been pilfered from a junkyard. Let's just hope they are more baffled by our comedic genius than they are by our military strategy. Jax was busy tweaking the time messer, her fingers moving with the precision of someone who knew she was one wrong move away from disaster. If all else fails, we can just pull a Bugs Bunny and paint a tunnel on a wall, right? We get that desperate, I'll volunteer to be the first one to run into it, Rylan joked, though there was truth lurking beneath the humor. Desperation was a familiar companion these days, wearing a mask of dark humor to keep them sane. As they worked, the Yatharn ships loomed on the edge of their screens, a constant reminder of the threat that lingered just out of reach. They were closing in, and it was only a matter of time before the next confrontation. "Think they'll buy it?" Jax asked, glancing over at Rylan. "Do we have a choice?" Rylan replied, his tone grim. "The Yatharn might not get slapstick, but they can't ignore confusion." "Let's give them a show they won't soon forget," Cade chuckled, a sound that was more air than mirth. "If this works, I'm writing a book, How to Defeat Aliens with Shakespeare and Slapstick." "Yeah, and you'll make a fortune in royalties," Nyx quipped, rolling her eyes. "Assuming there's anyone left to read it." "Optimism, Nyx," Cade said, wagging a finger. "It's the last luxury we can afford." Rylan looked at his team, feeling the tension ease slightly as they laughed in the face of their own impending doom. It wasn't much, but it was something, and sometimes a little something was all you needed. "All right, showtime's in a few hours," he said, bringing them back to the task at hand. "Let's make sure we've got more than just a prayer and a punchline." The hours ticked by with agonizing slowness, each minute stretching into eternity as the team rehearsed their plan. It was madness, pure and simple, but sometimes madness was the only rational response to insanity. Finally, the moment arrived. The Yatharn ships had moved into position, their sensors sweeping the area with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It was now or never. "Let's give him the old razzle-dazzle," Rylan murmured, the words barely audible over the hum of the ship. Jax, never one to shy away from theatrics, gave him a mock salute. "Ready to roll, Captain." With a deep breath that did nothing to calm his racing heart, Rylan signaled the start of their performance. The time messer whirred to life, projecting images of chaos and confusion straight into the Yatharn sensors. On the screens, the Yatharn ships hesitated, their formations faltering as they tried to make sense of the sudden barrage of nonsense. It was a sight to behold, a ballet of bewilderment as they scrambled to adjust. "Look at him go," Jax said, her voice tinged with awe. "It's like watching a drunk try to parallel park." Cade, ever the pessimist, added, "Let's just hope they don't sober up too quickly." The Yatharn fired blindly, their shots cutting through empty space as they tried to fend off what their sensors insisted was a threat. It was absurd, it was chaotic, and for the moment it was working. "Keep it up," Rylan urged, watching the spectacle with a mix of disbelief and hope. "We might just pull this off." As the Yatharn floundered, the rebels began their retreat, slipping away from the chaos with the stealth of shadows. It was far from over, but for now they had bought themselves precious time. "Man, I can't believe that actually worked," Jax said, her voice filled with wonder. "Believe it," Rylan replied, though he knew the real challenge was yet to come. The Yatharn would adapt, they always did, and next time they'd need something even crazier. As the command center settled back into its usual rhythm, the rebels took a moment to savor their small victory. It wasn't much, but in the grim darkness of their reality, it was enough to keep the fire of resistance burning. "We'll need a new plan soon," Nyx said, her expression thoughtful. "Something bigger, something unexpected." "You're full of good news, aren't you?" Cade remarked, though there was no bite in his words. "Just call it what it is," Rylan said, his tone resigned but resolute. "A stay of execution." They had won a battle, not the war, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for now, laughter echoed through the command center, a defiant sound in the face of overwhelming odds. Somewhere far beyond the stars, the Yatharn were probably scratching their heads, trying to decipher the lunacy that was humanity. And if Rylan and his crew had anything to say about it, they'd keep them guessing. "Let's get back to work," Rylan said, his voice steady. "We've got a galaxy to save, one bad joke at a time." With that, the rebels resumed their tireless efforts, each one determined to prove that even in the bleakest of times, hope could shine through the darkest of spaces. It was a long shot, but sometimes long shots were all you had. They'd find a way, improvising and stumbling through the chaos with the reckless abandon that only the desperate could muster. And so they continued, fighting for a future that seemed as distant as the stars themselves, with nothing but their wits and a few good jokes to guide them through the void. Rylan Voss sat back in his chair, eyeing the flickering holographic display in the command center like it was a particularly nasty piece of mold. "All right, folks, time for a Hail Mary play," he announced, his words slicing through the stale air. "We're going to broadcast a globally synchronized episode of human humor hysteria directly into the Yatharn communication network." Jack snorted, her neon hair glowing like the galaxy's worst rave. "You're serious, right? I mean, we're talking about a species that thinks irony is a fancy alloy. What's next? A stand-up routine?" Rylan shrugged, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Why not? They're all about efficiency and order, remember. Chaos is our weapon." Cade Joran, the historian with the sarcastic edge sharper than a vibroblade, looked up from his datapad. "So, let me get this straight. We're gonna blast them with every bit of comedic gold we've got left. That's our master plan, pretty much. Satire, sarcasm, slapstick, every trick in the book. Anything that can scramble their circuits and tickle their non-existent funny bone," Rylan confirmed, scratching at the perpetual stubble on his chin. Nix Arlo, ever the practical one, adjusted her goggles with a skeptical twist of her lips. "And this isn't just going to irritate them into wiping us out faster, how? Because," Rylan said, flashing a grin that had, "trust me, I'm a genius written all over it, they won't know whether to laugh or cry. They'll be too busy trying to figure out what the hell we're doing." Jax leaned back in her chair, boots propped up on the control panel. "Well, I'm all for confusing the hell out of them. Nothing like a bit of mass hysteria to keep the blood pumping." "Exactly," Rylan said, drumming his fingers on the table. "We need to hit them where it hurts, right in the logic processors." He turned his attention to Cade, who was busy compiling clips from the greatest hits of human comedy. "Got anything good on deck?" Cade grinned, his eyes gleaming with the kind of mischief that had gotten him booted out of more than one respectable institution. "Oh, you bet. I've got everything from Charlie Chaplin to Monty Python to that crazy guy who thought screaming at a camera was cutting edge." "Perfect," Rylan said, nodding. "Let's show them what a real existential crisis looks like." The command center buzzed to life with renewed energy, the team diving into their tasks with the kind of grim determination that only a suicidal plan could inspire. They were a ragtag bunch, held together by little more than duct tape, sarcasm, and a desperate hope for a better tomorrow. Jax tapped away at her console, a series of holographic interfaces spinning around her like a digital tornado. "Okay, I've patched into their network. We're ready to broadcast whenever you give the word." Rylan glanced around, noting the tension etched into each face. It was a gamble, all right, but when you were backed into a corner, sometimes the only way out was through insanity. "All right, let's go live," he said, his voice steady. "And may whatever gods are out there have a sense of humor." With a flick of a switch, the broadcast began, streams of comedic chaos erupting into the Yatharn communication network. Visuals and sounds danced across their monitors, a cacophony of punchlines and pratfalls designed to boggle the alien mind. On the command screens, the Yatharn ships shuddered, their movements jerky and uncoordinated as if they were trying to process the unexpected intrusion. It was like watching a robot try to understand human emotions, equal parts fascinating and terrifying. "Look at him flail," Jax said, her voice tinged with a mix of awe and disbelief. "It's like watching cats freak out over a laser pointer." Rylan couldn't help but chuckle, though it was more a release of tension than amusement. "Let's just hope they don't figure out how to turn it off too quickly." As the minutes ticked by, the Yatharn's confusion only grew, their ships darting in and out of formation like drunken dancers at an intergalactic disco. Each attempt to regroup was met with another wave of absurdity, leaving them more disoriented than before. "It's working," Nix said, her voice a mix of disbelief and relief. "They have no idea what to do." "That's the beauty of it," Cade said, leaning back with a satisfied grin. "We're not playing by their rules anymore." The broadcast continued, a relentless barrage of human humor that left the Yatharn reeling. It was bizarre, it was chaotic, and for the moment it was damned effective. "All right, time to make our move," Ryland said, signaling for the team to initiate the next phase. "While they're busy questioning their existence, let's slip out the back door." Under the cover of their comedic distraction, the rebels launched their counterattack, a series of hit-and-run maneuvers designed to destabilize the Yatharn fleet. It was a risky gamble, but with the element of surprise on their side, they managed to pull it off. As the chaos unfolded, Ryland couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance after all. "You know, if we survive this, I might just take up comedy full-time," Jax quipped, her fingers dancing over the controls. "Oh, please," Nick shot back. "You're about as funny as a malfunctioning airlock." "Hey, everyone's a critic," Jax replied with a wink. Ryland watched the banter unfold, a small smile playing on his lips. It was moments like these, in the midst of madness, that reminded him why they fought. For their friends, for their future, and for the chance to live free from tyranny. As the Yatharn's confusion grew, Ryland signaled for the final maneuver. "All right, let's make sure they remember this day." With a chorus of acknowledgments, the rebels launched their final attack, a coordinated assault that struck at the heart of the Yatharn fleet. The aliens, still reeling from the barrage of humor, were slow to react, their defenses crumbling under the unexpected assault. "Looks like their idea of a good time is getting pounded into oblivion," Cade observed, his tone dry. Ryland couldn't help but laugh, the sound rich with triumph. "Let's keep it that way." As the rebels withdrew, leaving a trail of chaos in their wake, the command center erupted into cheers. It wasn't a decisive victory, but it was a victory nonetheless, a moment of success in a war that had seen too few. "Well, that was something," Jax said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I can't believe we pulled that off." "Believe it," Ryland replied, his tone filled with a rare note of optimism. "We might just make it through this after all." Nick shook her head, a wry smile on her lips. "We're not out of the woods yet, but maybe we've bought ourselves some time." "Time to plan our next act," Cade added, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Ryland nodded, feeling the weight of leadership shift once more. "Let's get to work then. We've still got a galaxy to save." The command center buzzed with activity, the rebels diving back into their tasks with renewed determination. They were tired, they were battered, but they were far from beaten. With humor as their weapon and chaos as their ally, they would continue to fight for their future. As the Iors passed, the Yatharn slowly began to regroup, their confusion giving way to anger and resolve. They would be back stronger and more prepared than before, but Ryland and his crew were ready. "We can't keep relying on the same tricks," Nix said, her tone thoughtful as she reviewed the data from their latest encounter. "We need something new, something they won't see coming." Ryland nodded, his mind already racing through possibilities. "Agreed, but we've got time to figure it out. For now, let's take a moment to breathe." In the grim dark of their reality, moments of respite were rare and precious. They would take what they could get, clinging to hope and humor as they forged their path through the stars. As the team settled into the rhythm of their work, Ryland allowed himself a moment of reflection. They had come so far against all odds, and though the road ahead was fraught with danger, he knew they would face it together. With a deep breath, he turned his attention back to the task at hand. There was still much to do, and the universe wasn't going to save itself. "All right, team," he said, his voice ringing with determination. "We've survived another day. Let's make sure we survive tomorrow." And so they continued, the flicker of rebellion burning bright amidst the vast darkness of space. With each new challenge, they would adapt, improvise, and fight for the future they all dreamed of. It was a long shot, but as Ryland knew all too well, long shots were sometimes the best kind. The Yatharn would never understand what made humanity tick, but as long as Ryland and his crew had a say in it, they'd keep trying to figure it out. The universe yawned wide before them, full of possibility and peril, but they would face it with laughter on their lips and fire in their hearts. For in the end, they were human, and that, as it turned out, was their greatest strength of all. The command center was quieter now, the frantic energy of battle replaced with the quiet hum of processing victory. Well, not exactly victory, more of a "we didn't die today" celebration, which was as close as they'd gotten in a long time. Ryland Voss stood at the center of it all, watching his team with a mix of pride and disbelief. They'd pulled off the impossible, and as lovely as that sounded, it also meant that the universe was bound to throw something even worse their way next time. Jax, her neon hair practically glowing under the dim lights, was sprawled in her chair looking like she'd just run a marathon. "So, does this mean we can finally get decent coffee around here?" she asked, raising an eyebrow that screamed skepticism. "And snacks," Cade Joran chimed in, holding up his datapad like it was the holy grail of comedic warfare. "I've got memes that deserve a gourmet setting." Nix Arlo, always the pragmatist even in the face of absurdity, adjusted her goggles and shook her head. "You two seriously think we can just waltz back to Earth and everything will be back to normal? More like a shuffle," Rylan replied, his voice tinged with wry amusement. "But hey, we just orchestrated a slapstick against an interstellar empire. I'm not ruling out miracles. Or the possibility of us being completely insane," Cade added with a grin that could rival a Cheshire cat's. "You know, I've always said the key to effective leadership is just doing ridiculous things in a confident manner. Is that why you got kicked out of the Historians Guild?" Jack smirked. Cade put a hand to his chest, feigning offense. "I'll have you know they never appreciated my dedication to the comedic arts. Their loss." Ryland chuckled, his gaze drifting to the holographic map of the solar system. Earth's icon blinked at him like a beacon, a smog-filled, overcrowded beacon, but home nonetheless. "All right, jokes aside, we need to figure out how we're actually going to pull this off. Can't we just continue confusing the hell out of them?" Jack suggested, her tone half serious. "I mean, it worked once," Nick snorted. "Yeah, and I'm sure they are already preparing a 1,000-page report on how to be immune to bad jokes." "True," Rylan admitted. "But confusion is still our best friend. We just have to dress it up in a new outfit." Cross-dressing confusion. "Now there's an idea," Cade said, his mind visibly spinning webs of potential lunacy. "Though, I suppose we could take a page from Commedia dell'arte. Mask's improvisation may be a bit of slapstick with a dash of mistaken identity." "Perfect," Jax laughed. "We can dress up as each other and see if the Yatharn can figure out which of us is supposed to be the sane one." "That's a trick question," Ryland said with a grin. "None of us would qualify." They all laughed, and for a moment the weight of impending doom lifted. It was a fragile thing, this camaraderie forged in the fires of adversity, but it was their most valuable asset. "Okay, so we distract them with a new layer of crazy," Nick said, her expression turning thoughtful. "But what about the tech? We still need to actually reclaim Earth." "That's where the time messer comes in," Jack said, her voice suddenly serious. "I've been working on a way to. Well, let's call it temporal sleight of hand. Ever heard of a temporal echo?" Rylan leaned in, intrigued. "I'm guessing it's not just a fancy way of saying time travel." "Exactly. Instead of moving through time, we create a loop, a distraction in time, if you will. Makes it look like we're in multiple places at once, playing out different scenarios." "You really are just making this up as you go, aren't you?" Cade said, eyeing Jax with a mix of suspicion and grudging admiration. "Isn't that the entire basis of our strategy?" Jax shot back, a devilish glint in her eye. Rylan nodded. "It's risky, but it's all we've got. Besides, if we don't make it back, at least we'll be remembered as the most entertaining disaster in human history." "I'll make sure of it," Cade promised, tapping his datapad. "Our antics will be immortalized in the annals of history, or at least in the blooper reel of the universe." "All right then," Ryland said, clapping his hands together decisively. "Let's get to work. We have an empire to topple and a planet to reclaim." As the team dispersed to prepare for the next phase of their operation, Ryland took a moment to reflect on how far they'd come. 2 months ago, they'd been little more than a ragged group of survivors with nothing to lose. Now they had hope, fragile, Absurd and entirely unreasonable hope, but hope nonetheless. He turned his attention to the command center's main screen, watching the Yatharn ships regroup in the orbit of a distant moon. They were a tough, efficient force, but they lacked one crucial element: humor. And in the end, that was what would make the difference. The plan was simple enough in concept: sow confusion, divide and conquer, and reclaim Earth one absurdity at a time. Executing it, however, was about as straightforward as teaching cats to tap dance. Rylan and his team sat in the cramped confines of their ship, the Free Laughs, which was more duct tape and hope than actual ship at this point. It was hardly the grand armada one might envision for a planetary liberation, but it would have to do. Cade was running through the lineup of their greatest comedic hits, making sure each one was primed for broadcast directly into the Yatharn network. We've got some real gems in here, even found a few old political debates. Talk about a sitcom. Old Earth politics. Now that's dark, Nyx remarked, strapping herself into her seat. Might even make them think twice about conquering us. Or they'll just decide we're not worth the effort, Jax quipped, settling into her console. Honestly, if they haven't given up after our reality TV shows, nothing will scare them off. Rylan shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. All right, enough stalling. Let's get this show on the road. With a flick of Jax's hand, the ship's engines hummed to life, pushing them headlong into the fray. The Yatharn ships, still recovering from their last encounter with human humor, seemed almost hesitant as the Free Laughs approached. Think they are scared of us? Jax asked, watching the Yatharn vessels on her monitor. Maybe they're just trying to decide if we're actually a threat or just incredibly annoying, Cade suggested. Little of column A, little of column B, Rylan said. All right, Jax, let's see what this time messer can do. Jax tapped a few keys, her fingers dancing over the controls with practiced precision. Activating temporal echo in 3, 2, 1. A strange shimmer enveloped the ship, a ripple that seemed to defy the laws of reality itself. Suddenly, the Free Laughs appeared to be in 3 places at once, each echo performing a different maneuver. Well, that's unsettling, Nyx commented, watching as one of the echoes performed a barrel roll that would have made a fighter pilot proud. Think of it as 3 times the confusion, Jax said, her voice tight with concentration. The Yatharn won't know which one to aim for. Sure enough, the alien ships hesitated, their weapons systems flickering between targets like a malfunctioning slot machine. It was like watching a dog trying to decide which squirt to chase. Here they come, Rylan said, noting the movement on the tactical display. Get ready to improvise. The battle that followed was a dance of chaos, a symphony of disorder orchestrated by the rebels in their quest for liberation. With every burst of comedy broadcasted into the Yatharn's comms, the aliens faltered, their precision and unity breaking down under the assault of laughter and absurdity. Cade's voice crackled over the intercom, excitement threading through his usual sarcasm. Looks like they're starting to malfunction. I knew those Monty Python sketches would come in handy someday. Never doubt the power of British comedy, Jax replied, her focus unwavering as she piloted the ship through the chaos. As the echoes of their ship blurred across the battlefield, Rylan kept his mind on the ultimate goal, getting back to Earth. They were close now, tantalizingly close, but the Yatharn weren't going to give up without a fight. Nyx's voice broke through his thoughts, sharp and urgent. Movement on the Yatharn side. Looks like they're trying to reorganize. Time to switch things up, Rylan said, gesturing to Jax. Let's give them something new to chew on. Jax nodded, fingers flying over her console. With a quick command, the time messer shifted gears, transforming the temporal echo into a dazzling array of holographic diversions. Suddenly, the Free Laughs wasn't just in 3 places, it was in dozens. The Yatharn ships floundered, their sensors overwhelmed by the barrage of false targets. It was chaos, pure and simple, and in the heart of it all, the rebels saw their chance. Now, Rylan ordered, his voice steady and calm despite the storm of insanity around them. Head for Earth. Full speed. The ship surged forward, slipping through the cracks in the Yatharn's defenses like a wisp of smoke. They were headed home, and nothing was going to stop them. Earth was a sight for sore eyes, even if it was still mostly rubble and disappointment. As the free laughs touched down, the reality of it all began to sink in. They were back from the brink, back from the madness, and back to where it all began. The crew disembarked, their feet hitting solid ground with a sense of finality. For a moment, they just stood there, breathing in the familiar air and letting it wash over them like a bomb. "Well," Jack said, breaking the silence, "that was a hell of a trip. And to think, we did it all with jokes and half-baked technology," Cade added, glancing around with a bemused expression. Rylan looked at his team, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and affection. They'd done it. They'd taken on the might of an empire and come out the other side, bruised but not broken. "All right," he said, his voice carrying the weight of the journey they'd been on. "Let's get to work. Earth isn't going to fix itself." Nix nodded, a determined glint in her eye. "We've got a lot of rebuilding to do." "Yeah," Rylan agreed. "But if we've learned anything, it's that humans are nothing if not adaptable." "Adaptable and hilariously stubborn," Jax added with a grin. "And don't forget, we've got the power of humor on our side," Cade said, holding up his datapad triumphantly. Rylan chuckled, feeling the weight of the universe lift ever so slightly from his shoulders. They had a long road ahead, but they were ready to face it together. With laughter, resilience, and a dash of irreverence, they'd make Earth a place worth fighting for again. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and red, Rylan and his team looked to the future, a future they would shape with their own hands, forged in the fires of rebellion and tempered by the strength of their spirit. "Let's get to it," Rylan said, leading the way. "After all, we've got a universe to save."